For joining us. Many of you have been on, this is our third one of these master classes that was Lacey's idea, and I've helped her kind of shape them and moderate them as we go. We did Ballard Canyon first a couple months ago, and then we did Santa Rita Hills last time. Last time we integrated a slideshow, which I have a slideshow again today. And oh, here's Krista. And this time also, Lacey and her husband actually made a flyover too. So we have a short geographic film. And I was joking earlier that, maybe next time we'll have virtual reality. We'll just keep, amping the technology till we're fully teched out. Anyway, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Kettman. I am a senior editor at the Santa Barbara Independent, where I've worked since 1999 and started covering wine soon after I started at the paper. I wrote for Wine Spectator for a number of years, and then in 2014, Wine Enthusiast hired me as the contributing editor in charge of the Central Coast. So I cover all of the wines and kind of the trends and culture from basically the Southern Bay Area down to Santa Barbara, and I also do a good amount of Southern California too, which is mostly like Temecula, a little bit of Malibu, but most of my emphasis is on the Central Coast for sure, and a lot of it's Santa Barbara, so I've come to know this region really well. I live in Santa Barbara. The Santa Rita Hills are about, and the Cappy Canyon, depending which way you go, are only about 30, 40 minutes from my house. So I've come to know these people and these places quite well. I actually have my first book is coming out this month called Vines and Vision. It's 632 pages. It's 8 pounds. It's a good weapon if you don't want to read it. But that's coming out later this month. So there's a bunch of, most of the wineries that are in it have also bought copies to sell for themselves. So you'll be able to find it in a number of places. But enough about me. Let's jump into Happy Canyon. And with us today, we have Bradley Long from Grassini up here. We have Ernst Storm and Rick Grimm from Grimm's Bluff. We have Simone Fleury from Crown Point, and we have Tyler Thomas from Star Lane Vineyards. So as you know, we have some wines from each of them, and we'll be tasting them as we go along. I'm going to start the slideshow now. How do I do this again? Share screen. And do this. And so let's do a little, what? That's the wrong button. Great. What just happened there? Done. Okay.
Close it.
There we go. Okay, so thank you for joining us again. So some of these shots are actually from our book. I did it with Macduff Everton, and so he's a pretty renowned guy that shot for Nat Geo for 30, 40 years or so. So he took a lot of these shots. This is kind of a general scene of Happy Canyon. You have Crown Point back over here. You have, I believe, Vogelsang here, and some other vineyards. Star Lane kind of comes back here. But the region is a very rural area. There's a lot of horse estates. You can see this is a horse racing rink right here, or track there. And so a lot of these old equestrian estates have kind of morphed into being some of these wine places or vineyards too. So to kind of give us our bearings, here we are again in the San Ynez Valley. Happy Canyon is over here. So, the Santa Maria Valley was our first AVA in Santa Barbara County. That was in 1981. And then the San Ynez Valley started in 1983. And really in the early days, as they do in most regions, we planted a bunch of different stuff just to see what worked. And so while the Pinot and Chard were doing pretty well, especially in Santa Maria and off to the west side of the San Ynez Valley, there was a lot of Cabernet that was planted, and it didn't do so hot because it wasn't warm enough. They weren't the right clones. It wasn't being farmed correctly. So we kind of had this bad reputation in the early days of making kind of reedy green Cabernet Sauvignon. But what they found as time went on was that the Santa Rita Hills here was a shining star for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And so in the late 90s, they basically said, hey, we should make, let's distance ourselves from the kind of up and down reputation of this region, call ourselves the Santa Rita Hills, and really establish ourselves there. So that was the first sub-AVA of the San Ynez Valley, was the Santa Rita Hills. Meanwhile, right around the same time the Santa Rita Hills are kind of getting themselves figured out, some of the prominent growers in the region, including like Jeff Newton of Coastal Vineyard Care, they're starting to realize that, wait a minute, if you go to the east side of the San Ynez Valley, way over here, it does get warm enough to ripen some of these Bordeaux varieties. Meanwhile, viticulture was getting better. They were getting smarter. There was more clonal selection out there. And so by the late 90s, they're starting to plant some of these vineyards out here in Happy Canyon. Fast forward about 10 years, and they decide, hey, we need to kind of show everyone that we are different than just Santa Barbara County, and that we're certainly different than Santa Rita Hills. We need to come up with our own appellation. And so they started the process to become Happy Canyon of Santa Barbara, AVA. They employed Wes Hagen, who was a vintner that was integral in the Santa Rita Hills AVA creation, and he helped them figure it out. There's a fun story behind the place name Happy Canyon. You know, when you create an American viticultural area, you have to rely on names that have a historic use in the area. And the legend has it that Happy Canyon was called as much because all the bootleggers were making hooch during Prohibition up in the canyons, and that's the name that stuck. So it's a little different now, a little more refined now, I guess, than making hooch up in the canyons. But you know, there's some tradition that persists. So here is the Happy Canyon AVA. It's very about 24,000 acres total, but as you can see, not many individual vineyards. There's a few estate wineries here. But really the tastings are all by appointment. They don't, there was kind of, as Happy Canyon was getting started, there was some neighborhood opposition to the fear of Santa Barbara becoming the next Napa County or Napa Valley. So they made it so they couldn't really do tasting there. So that's why you see a lot of these places, including Grissini and Grimm's Bluff, and they have tasting rooms in other areas. So Grimm's Bluff has a tasting room in Los Olivos. Grissini has one in downtown Santa Barbara, and Deerberg has their own facility in the Santa Rita Hills as well. But if, you know, especially for journalists, you can go visit these places by appointment and set it up with these guys, and it'll be well worth your effort because these are really stunning estates, dramatic topography, and really a lot different when you start to get into the kind of volcanic soils. And there's really different soils out here that come down a lot from Figueroa Mountain. So this is all wilderness back here. And you see these blue outcrops of serpentinite just coming out of these mountains, and it makes really interesting soils down on the vineyards below here. So here is, we did this last time with Santa Rita Hills, Lacey's husband. What's his name again, Lacey? Anyway, Lacey's husband made these maps for us. So this is really cool. So you're looking west, right? So this is the eastern edge of the San Ynez Valley. We're almost like at a bird's eye view above the peaks of the Los Padres National Forest and Figueroa Mountain. We're looking west. So Lompoc's way out here, town of San Ynez is here, Solvang, Buellton, all this in this general area. So you come far east and then you see where these vineyards lie. I don't know how your guys' your screen is showing, but Star Lane's way over here to the right, up its own little canyon. Crown Point's a little down from that. Grissini's kind of across the way, and then Grimm's Bluff is up on its own, indeed, bluff, kind of over here. This slide is pretty cool. Even in just doing the research for this talk, we kind of forget how close these vineyards are to the ocean the other way. So this is looking south, and the ocean is just right over the mountain. So that's what, you know, you've probably heard it a million times if you know anything about Santa Barbara Canyon wine or county wine. But we're where the transverse range turns to open these mountains east and west. And so what you have is you have ocean influence coming from way over here, and to some extent you have some ocean influence coming over the mountains here as well, because as the crow flies, they're quite close. But these mountains, keep in mind, are, you know, 2,500 to 3,500 feet tall. So it's hard for some, you know, on some days you'll get some fog coming over them, and other days it's going to stick on the coastal side. Here is this is where I live, like basically right here. So this is Goleta, this is like UCSB out here, and then Santa Barbara is just kind of right over this way. So, so I think that kind of covers all of the basics of this. I mean, the region has grown to some extent, but there's not a lot of vineyards out here, and that's still the case today. Grimm's Bluff is actually one of the newer ones. And then there was one called the Santa Ynez Vineyard, which is far out here east. I'm not exactly sure where it is in relation to this, maybe out here. And it was a fairly big vineyard planted a few years ago to a wide array of varieties. So while Happy Canyon has gone to prove that Bordeaux wines, particularly Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc, can indeed excel out here in the eastern end of the San Ynez Valley. There is also, I think they planted like 26 different varieties or something at this other vineyard. So including, you know, things like Carignan and there's some Zinfandel, which you don't see a lot, almost at all in Santa Barbara County. So we'll see how that goes. And I know there's some kind of interesting grapes out there with an eye on climate change too. You know, what kind of grapes should we be growing as the climate gets a little bit warmer? So I think that takes us up to speed. Also, if anyone has any questions and don't want to chime in, you're welcome to chime in, but you can use the chat box too, which you're all probably familiar with at this point. And so now let's move into our first wines here, which we have Bradley Long from Grissini. We're going to try his Sauv Blanc first and learn a little bit about what they're up
Matt,
to. So, yeah.
Could I just ask everybody who's not speaking to go on mute? There's a lot of background noise and tasting noise going on.
That'd be helpful. Did everyone
Thank
get
you.
that? Great. All right. Bradley.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. And this is the wine we're having. I mean, most of you have it in front of you there. It is the 2019 Block 14 Sauvignon Blanc from Grissini Family Vineyards. And Bradley, tell us a little about yourself and a little about the Grissini family and the history of that property.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in the industry in the early 2000s up in Napa Valley as a cellar seasonal worker intern at Cake Bread Cellars. I bounced around Napa Valley a little bit and met the right people at the right times to help mentor me along my way as far as winemaking goes. The last place I worked at in Napa Valley was Fantesca Estates Winery. I got to work with some great winemakers there. It's a custom crush facility. Got to see a lot of different perspectives before coming down to Santa Barbara County and taking over this program here at Grissini Family. It's been a good journey. My focus has definitely been Bordeaux varieties, namely Cabernet Sauvignon. Much of the reason why I think I'm here now.
And what was the impression that you had coming into Santa Barbara County of our Bordeaux varieties, especially coming from up north?
I had no impression, is the honest truth. I had no idea Santa Barbara County was growing, had a region specifically growing Bordeaux varieties. Although, you know, Cabernet Sauvignon grows, well, people try to grow it everywhere anyway. So I didn't really have much of an impression before coming here, before doing my own research and reaching out to the Grissinis specifically, and then other producers around the area, and was really surprised with at that time what I found, the potential for us growing Bordeaux varieties out here is endless. I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet. So.
And what was had you had much experience, particularly with Sauv Blanc, related to the wine we're trying right now? Was that something you'd been doing up in Napa?
Very little experience with Sauvignon Blanc, and that's something that I more learned on the job here. I was definitely a part of making a few Sauvignon Blancs in Napa, but not many. And the experiences that I had were more burn and turn in terms of filling up tanks and fermenting and feeding tanks, feeding ferments, rather than a real focus on the grape itself. My focus, I have almost as many Sauvignon Blanc ferments each year as I do red wine ferments, somewhere in the like 27, 28 fermentation range. Most of them being small fermentations and using different cultured yeasts, neutral oak, stainless steel, controlled climates or controlled environments with glycol tanks, smaller stainless steel fermentations the only control I have is ambient at that point, to try and, you know, create as many different flavors, textures, and really layer the wines and build the wines up to what we end up having.
Right. And when was Grissini planted again? I mean, they were kind of on the earlier side of the Happy Canyon plantings, right?
Yeah. So Grissini was planted in 2002 was when I think we broke ground. The Grissinis bought the property in the 80s and didn't really do a whole lot with it. I think it wasn't until maybe some acreage started going in over at Vogelzang or McKinley or something along those lines where Larry Grissini figured he might be able to do something with the property that he invested in. And it's funny, you mentioned Jeff Newton earlier of Coastal Vineyard Care, and Larry reached out to Jeff Newton about possibly planting a vineyard out here, and Jeff, being himself, told Larry, well, why the hell would you want to do that? You know how much it costs to plant a vineyard, and almost try to, deter him from doing so. Where Ben Mers, our vineyard manager, stepped in, and Jeff's partner, and said, whoa, wait. This is how we make our money. And sure enough, this property is quite special for a lot of different reasons. So yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple. I forgot to do the flyover of one thing, which we'll do in a little bit, but I forgot to show some of the slides of you guys too. So where is so there you are. So this is one of McDuff's pictures. There's Bradley without a beard, pouring for Katie Grissini and Larry and Sharon Grissini, the owners, in their beautiful winery there on the property. The property is, there's some flatter parts where vines are, but you guys have also planted up into the ridges, which is always kind of impressive to me. And there's a nice, beautiful pond in the middle. There's the wood winery, which was, I think, a lot of recycled barn wood and some wood that was found like at the bottom of the Columbia River or something like that.
Yeah, most of the winery is built from reclaimed timber that they used to use as barges to deliver supplies to the lumberjack camps, and eventually the wood would soak up so much that it would just drop to the bottom of the river. But the bottom of the river is so deep and cold that it preserved the wood quite nice, and yeah, it's quite a feature for the whole a winery building and barn space.
And what is this? This block is crazy to me. I mean, this is like on a cliffside. What is that up there?
Yeah, so it is on a cliffside, and there are nets at the bottom to catch people. It's that block is Cabernet Franc, and that whole side of the vineyard, that whole planting side is quite different. We took the approach of a great grape grower up in Napa Valley, David Abreu, in designing the aspects and building that side of the vineyard. Ultra high density. Our rows are 2 feet apart, 2.5 feet between vines. The vines are about 14 to 16 inches off the ground. 5,800 vines per acre. The canopies of the vines kind of cover the whole fruiting zone up. So we're relying on that radiating heat off the ground to mature our fruit rather than the filtered sunlight through our more conventional, traditional style plantings on the rest of the vineyard. And that's actually the site where this wine comes from. This is our only Sauvignon Blanc that's planted on that side of the property. And that whole hillside is separated by a creek bed, which also separates our soil type. So it's mostly calcium-rich soils on that side. And I really think it shows through the wine itself in terms of sense of place for this Sauvignon Blanc specifically.
And you make how many Sauv Blancs each vintage? I mean, I know you make a lot of fermentation lots, but at the end of the day, what do you bottle?
Yeah, right. So 3 Sauvignon Blancs. One mainly stainless steel fermented. There's a little bit of neutral oak fermentation that goes into that. That's our largest production Sauvignon Blanc. We just call it Happy Candy Sauvignon Blanc. We do a barrel fermented, barrel aged Sauvignon Blanc. That's our reserve. We do about I don't know, 125 cases of that. There's a little bit of secondary fermentation that goes into that, about 10% over the whole volume. And then there's this wine, and this is 100% stainless steel to really show what this block has to offer. My predecessors spoke highly of this block, and after my first vintage here in 2014, it really did shine through a few different scenarios of fermentation, and we figured out that we need to set a little bit of this aside each year to share with you guys.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I like how it has. I mean, it's got some riper characteristics, but that kind of typical grassiness really shines right through it too, which is, I think, a really nice combo. So, all right, Bradley, let's move on to Ernst and Rick over at Grimm's Bluff and try our next Sauvignon Blanc. As I kind of mentioned earlier, Grimm's Bluff is one of the newer vineyards in the area, and was planted. I believe it's the first vineyard in Santa Barbara County to be planted as biodynamic from the get-go. So, Rick and Ernst, take it away. I will show some slides here as we talk, because we have a few from you guys. So let me figure out how to do that again.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Myself, Ernst Storm, and Rick Grimm. I'm South African, came to Santa Barbara County in 2005, having worked up in the foothills, wanting to explore a little bit of the Northern Hemisphere. Came and visited Santa Barbara, was drawn to the fact that there was endless possibilities here. The area, very conducive to growing high quality wines. Very similar climate to where I'm from, Western Cape, a Mediterranean climate, close to the ocean. We've got the Pacific, like Matt said, east-west valleys. And met Rick, and they brought me on in 2017. I was really drawn to this vineyard and working with the Grimms. It's a biodynamically farmed vineyard. I have my own label, which this was an opportunity for me to really focus on something else. To focus on fruit that's grown biodynamically on a very interesting site, very consistent fruit. And so the journey started in 2017, first vintage, and there's obviously a style. Stylistically, our goal is to really capture the vineyard and make wines that really represent this vineyard. Rick planted the vineyard in 2012. You can tell us a little bit about what drew him to biodynamics and why he chose to go that route.
I didn't know much about biodynamics when we decided to plant, but I had the good fortune of meeting Philippe Coteret, who's a biodynamic consultant, French biodynamic consultant, and he talked a little bit about.
That's who's in this picture with you guys, right?
Yeah, the cowboy, the French cowboy. That's Philippe. So he explained what it was all about, and he said a few things that really caught my ear, and that was, no chemicals, no man-made fertilizers, and adding microbes that will help promote root growth. And I immediately thought back to when I was like a 6 or 7 year old kid, and I'd go to my grandmother's in the countryside in West Virginia. And she did not have the money to invest in insecticides and fertilizers, but I could still taste the tomatoes and the beans and the corn. That was just, the flavors were just amazing. And I said, okay, you've sold me. We're going to go biodynamic and see how it works. And I'm glad we did. I can see a definite difference in our wines year by year. I'm seeing more minerality come through because I think it has pushed the roots down into the riverbed that's below it. And we're really starting to pull flavors that I don't think we would see if we'd not gone biodynamic. Plus the aspects of not having to put chemicals in my wine. So.
And I remember you telling the story when maybe when I first visited you, like how shocked that the farmers were, how far those roots went down in the first few years, right?
Yeah, well, we used Coastal Vineyard Care. Jeff Newton was up here. We dug some test pits to decide where to grow. And Philippe kept saying all along, look, we're going to put some biodynamic preparations on, we're going to do some sprays, it's going to help promote root growth, and we're going to get those roots down below the clay layer, which is like 7-8 feet thick in some places, and get those roots into the gravel. I had Coastal Vineyard Care said, you're not going to, it's not going to go through the clay. So in 2014, we took a backhoe out into 5 different places on the vineyard, and those roots are in the riverbed, which is 8 feet, 9 feet below the surface. So it does work. It does have great benefit in terms of getting the roots growing the way that you want them to grow and keeping them healthy and keeping the vines in general healthy. It's a good way to go in my view.
Hey Rick, what rootstocks were you guys using?
We use 101-14 and 5BB because they weren't sure which one was going to work better. So we've got a 50-50 split between those two rootstocks. I can't tell any difference. They both seem to do very well. But
I want to show this picture again. The other thing I love about your property is that you have this pond here, which I gather is part of it's obviously part of irrigation, but there's kind of a biodynamically treated pond too, right? I mean, there's an ecosystem involved, and then just from a human aesthetic situation, it's actually like a zero edge, invisible edge pond with Lake Kachuma in the background. So this is our main reservoir in the county, and when there's water in it, which is right now at least, but there wasn't for a few years, but you have essentially this invisible edge experience, which is pretty cool. And then you have a little beach here that you can hang out on, and you also have olive trees obviously here. And it's really dynamic, fun property to visit, and beautiful because there's hardly anything on this side of the valley. And like you told me when we first met, your view is never going to change. Now these mountains are going to stay these wild mountains, which is I think really cool for everybody to know. But so tell us about this wine, Ernst. What are you trying to do with the Sauv Blanc from there? I mean, you make some of your own as well, and so what are you trying to do with it?
Yeah, so yeah, like I said, like the goal, my goal is always to build up a track record. Santa Barbara in a bigger scheme is a young area, and my track record with working with vineyards in Santa Barbara County is only 15, 16 years. So my ultimate goal is to figure out how to make these wines to best represent where they're from. We're obviously working here with quality fruit planted on this sandy loam above this clay. And like Rick said, the roots are really deep, and so our yields are kept relatively low because of being in Santa Barbara County and dealing with pretty low-grade soils. You combine that with biodynamic farming. If you've got grapes that has a certain potential to turn into something special, and so I wanted this wine to be the reserve to be not necessarily a fruit-driven wine, more minerality. So we whole cluster press this. Typically, my Sauvignon Blanc is fermented with crushed fruit. We press crushed fruit, but we wanted to go a different way and really showcase the vineyard. Stylistically in Happy Canyon, there's riper Sauvignon Blancs, there's leaner Sauvignon Blancs, there's cold fermented Sauvignon Blancs, barrel fermented Sauvignon Blancs. We chose to go with concrete on this. because of the flow of the lees and the way it builds texture. We added a fin last year so we can control the temperatures of the ferment. But yeah, the goal was to make something that has minerality, that has natural acidity, and it's not just about tropical fruit, but also, you know, almost get this kind of funkiness to the wine, which I enjoy, which I feel like is part of the us, you know, having a closed ecosystem, a biodynamic vineyard is making this wine really capture the site. Aged on the lees. We employ a lot of reductive winemaking, so we use a lot of dry ice, CO2, argon, to really protect these aromatics and flavors. And yeah, we don't overstir the wine. The wine was typically stirred maybe 2-3 times in that span, just to keep as much energy in the wine. But yeah, it's 17 was the first vintage. 18, 19. I can see how now we're starting to see how these wines develop and evolve in the bottle and in tank. And to us, it's a journey. It's about figuring out what's the best possible way to make these wines to capture where they're from, regardless of anything else.
Great. Thank you, Stacey. And I like you mentioned like a kind of a funkiness, and what I get from some Sauv Blancs, and this one included, is almost like a kelpie thing, like a seashore thing. Which, if you read that and you don't know what I'm talking about, you could think it sounds like a bad thing, but I think it's actually a cool component.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like when I say there's a little armpit in the wine. You know, you don't want to say that to the wrong person. But like a little armpit to me goes a long way in Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah,
So
I
South
don't think
African armpits smell good.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our first red wine, and we'll get back to Grimm's for their cab later. Tyler Thomas from Starlane Vineyard. How you doing today? Tell us a little bit about the property and about this wine. I'll start showing some slides. There's some pretty pictures from your spot, and you can just kind of talk over it. So.
Yeah, nice to have everybody virtually. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for those 2 white wines, guys. They were delicious. So there's a great view of our lane. That's a picture that I took I don't know, a few years ago maybe. It's not abnormal to see that either during June and July. So you're kind of looking south there, down into the valley of Happy Canyon. That mountaintop of the clouds in the far part of the picture, that's the St. Anne's Valley. Matt mentioned the ocean is just on the other side of those mountains. So this cold air or fog that you can see is what comes all the way from the west, all the way out toward Point Conception. It does not come over those mountains to the south there. And standing at this place at Starlane was really what convinced me to move down and join the Deerberg family with this project. I was in Sonoma County at the time. I have a couple degrees in plant biology, and then studied at UC Davis. And then that's Jim and Mary, the founders there. And I worked first at High de Vilaine Wines in Napa Valley for 4 years before moving on to what was at the time PAX, and then became Donnellan Wines. So I had a 5-year hiatus away from Cabernet and Cabernet Franc, and actually at HDV we didn't even make Cabernet Franc. We just made Cab Sauv and Merlot, Chardonnay, Syrah. And so anyway, I met the Deerberg family, and 2011 was the right job for me, but not the right time. But I was so compelled by the Starlane Vineyard and by their vision, which is a very multi-generational, long-term vision. That property that you were looking at there was something they purchased after 10 years of looking or so. Jim almost bought a chateau in France. He looked at Napa and Sonoma throughout the 80s. in early 90s because he had become a collector of Bordeaux wines and really wanted to develop, an estate in California where he could grow great Bordeaux. He actually, the family owns a winery in Missouri as well called Hermanhof. They've had it since 1976. It's all native French hybrids and Native American species that they grow there. They knew that was not going to be the land for their Cabernet. So anyway, when they got to Star Lane after 10 years of looking, it took them about a half an hour to decide that this was the property. And I don't know. Jim doesn't do many things unwittingly, so I'm not sure how much analysis he actually did or calculus in his head about the potential for Bordeaux varietals in Happy Canyon. But our area, as Ernst had mentioned, is pretty dry. And Matt had mentioned at the beginning how when you go further east where we are, things get warmer. I think there's an impression, generally, I was teaching some Japanese sommeliers a year ago in Japan about Santa Barbara County, and there was this sort of assumption, oh, you're going south, it gets hotter. And it's really not the case because of the transverse mountains and because of our airflow in our area. But when you say that an area is warm and dry, you're describing what's great for Bordeaux varietals. And I think there's a real difference between making savory, herbal-driven wines that are Bordeaux red varietal based versus green. And as Matt mentioned, there was a lot of green Cabernet-based wines made in Santa Barbara County early on in the 70s and 80s when they were planting things in areas that were too cool. But we really there's such a range of textures that you can harvest your grapes at here, because if you want to be at lower potential alcohols and a little bit leaner, you're not going to have to worry about bell pepper. I've at least not at Star Lane. I mean, I've measured it, I've looked for it. So this Cabernet Franc that you're tasting is about, I don't remember the exact percentages. It's maybe 86, 87% Cab Franc. The reason I don't remember is because I don't really care. When we make the blends, we're looking to preserve the integrity of what we deem is varietal for our vineyard. So we know that because we have all the relative comparisons. But then we'll add other varieties just to make sure the mouthfeel and the texture kind of lands where we think is appropriate for the wine. With the Cabernet Franc, we usually find a little bit of hollowness in the mid palate. And yet it usually finishes with grippier dry tannin. And so sometimes we add like a little Cabernet or maybe Merlot to give it a little juiciness in the mid palate. But I chose the 18 because while young and I think aromatically it's fairly tight, maybe not as expressive as it will be. I really like the texture of this wine. It has a little bit more tension, which we usually hope for. Not just with our Cabernet Franc, but with the Star Lane red wines in general. Yeah, you guys haven't asked any questions yet. I'm like keeping an eye on the chat. Anybody have any questions for any of us? So,
you're answering all the questions, perhaps. But,
yeah, maybe we're just speaking something.
And when you came, I remember when you came into Star Lane, there had been a series of winemakers before, and there was this. They were kind of like trying to figure out a style that everyone could kind of agree on, and it seemed like maybe they were trying to emulate other things that maybe the site didn't really want to do. Was there must have been a learning curve for you to kind of sit back and watch for a couple of years? Well, you couldn't sit back, but to watch for a couple of years and see where the vineyard was going to take you, right?
Matt, that presumes a certain humility that I may not possess. That's true. Anytime you're making a wine of sight, which of course everybody says they're doing, but as I mentioned, my background is plant physiology. Like we sell fruit. I work with winemakers. I think I wish winemakers paid more attention to vine physiology and not to the appearance of a vineyard. And so, but it does take time. It takes 3, 4, 5 years to really see a trend and start to understand how vines are reacting to various scenarios that the vintage to vintage gives you. But I did early on tell the Dierbergs that I felt like their wines, they were contrived. Um, they were made in a way where if you plug in these things, then you're supposed to get this result. And I think that often happens sometimes to new places where you have consultants who also don't know the place that well, but who have a really good reputation for good reason. They had that had great reputation for good reason, and they did a good job of planning the vineyard. But the wines themselves, I think, were, kind of back and forth. And okay, yeah, you added a lot of oak. Okay, yes, you picked really right. But why were you doing these things? Is that what the site was calling for? And it was my hypothesis to them that because of the climate and because of the way Vitis vinifera reacts to a dry, warm area, you ought to be able to pick earlier without fearing greenness and build textures that are a little bit different than Napa Valley or Sonoma, which, quite frankly, we probably should do because that's not where we are. And fortunately or unfortunately, we don't get the benefit of putting Bordeaux on our label, which sometimes I wish we did, because people have likened our wine that way sometimes. And those guys get really great pricing for their wines. And our wine would be considered rich if it was a Bordeaux. And then perhaps compared to Napa, we're a little bit leaner. Maybe not this 13 to straw, but but we can't put Napa on the label either. And I think everyone here, wants to make a distinct imprint about understanding what Happy Canyon is through these varieties. And I think we're on our way. I mean, I just finished my 8th vintage. It's hard to believe. I've been here 8 years now. So it's fun to taste. It's fun to have this 13 to share. That was my first vintage. It was 2013.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fun to watch you take the reins there and really bring really one of the most beautiful properties I've ever seen anywhere on the planet into line and to upholding what it should be doing, I think. So.
Well, thank you.
Let's move on to some Merlot. Another grape that Santa Barbara has had a hand in knocking its reputation a little bit with Sideways. Bradley, you came into when you came into Grissini, they had pulled. We just talked recently about this. They had pulled out some blocks in Merlot, and yet you kind of thought it was a pretty strong performer. And now it's become one of your. This wine has become one of the top wines in your entire portfolio. So tell us about how that came to be.
Yeah, so I can't speak for my predecessors and what they saw or didn't see in the Merlot plantings on this property, but I will say this, and yeah, per our conversation a few days ago, Matt, it's I think I expressed to you my frustrations with Merlot more through the fermentation process than anything else. This grape just did not want to cooperate with me being the control freak that I am. So ultimately, it just took care of itself, which, to echo, I think a little bit of what Tyler is talking about is we're more stewards than anything else, right? It's not really up to us to have this master plan in creating and crafting these wines. The word craft, I think, is overused in what we do. The best that we can do is grow good fruit, and I know this has been said many times before, but our wines are made in the vineyard. So starting there is the best that we can do. As far as this Merlot goes, though, there's a number of things that I do like to have, or think I'd like to have enough control over inside the winery. And this was not listening to any one of those things. It had a mind of its own, and in the end, it treated me well. So every year since then, it's gone the same root, and I don't try to rein it in anymore, and it has continued to show extremely well year in, year out for our portfolio.
Yeah, I remember tasting whatever vintage it was. Maybe it was the first one you did, and just being like, I taste a good amount of Merlot, and they're kind of all over the map. Some of them are quite good these days because it seems like you shouldn't be making a bad Merlot because you'll get laughed out of the park. But in other ways, it seems like sometimes Merlot is like something that's just another wine, a red wine in a bigger portfolio, and they're just not that interested in it. And if you're going to buy it, you're going to buy it anyway. So why spend that much time on it? But you guys seem to craft a really beautiful one each vintage, and it's just also just like it's a generous wine. It's not it's both kind of like serious but also kind of playful, right? It's just like hedonistically pleasurable, which is I always like in the top end wine. So
yeah.
Are they from the original plantings, or did you, after the ripping out, did they plant more? Are these like newer vines?
So this Merlot is from the original plantings, and so there were 3 blocks of Merlot originally dating back to 2002. 2 of them got ripped out and planted over to Cabernet Sauvignon. And then I recently, 3 years ago, ripped up a little 0.4 acres of some sick Cabernet Sauvignon that was on our property, and replanted 2 Merlot, and it's juxtapositioned to the existing block that was already here. And I was talking about this with Matt the other day. When I started back up in Napa, the first place I lived was a property next to the famous Three Palms Duckhorn Merlot site there, and I had the pleasure to wake up every day and walk out on my deck and look at those palm trees, and it was a vineyard planted specifically for Merlot as well, for cake bread. And so when I did replant that 0.4 acres a few years ago, we did pick that clone 18 Three Palms Bears Flats Merlot, and we finally had the pleasure to get some fruit off of it the past couple of years, and it's such a different animal than what we're tasting here. Like definitely a lot deeper, darker fruit, and it'll be fun to start blending with in years to come.
That makes me think about how I think all of the wineries here are all estate. So we all grow our own grapes and make our own wine. And the reason I asked about that, because our Merlot, we're finally getting into the second generation of vines. So our vineyard was planted in 1998, and then another round in 2001. And there's just some stuff that's waning or wasn't making the grade that's been torn out and we redeveloped. And Merlot was one of them in this one area. We finally this year got like a first real glance at what the fruit's going to be like. And I'm really, really excited about it. And it really makes you wonder about the health of some of these older plantings. What was the material really like? And, the Merlot that's still sort of the backbone of our Merlot bottling is one of these blocks where I'm kind of scratching my head going, I don't know how much longer this thing's going to hang on, but it still makes really good wine. But now we have it in contrast to these 5-year-old vines. You're like, whoa, this is a little more serious. And, it sort of makes you, it really, what's the right word? Not cast out, but that old mantra of old vines make better wine, which I've railed against for a long time. Now that I'm seeing these young vines produce really good wine, I'm like, I really don't know about this old vines make better wine thing.
Yeah. Completely.
We can have a debate about that afterwards if anyone wants to talk.
Absolutely. I think, in terms of Merlot for us, and Tyler brings up a good point. We, like all of us, are 100% estate. I don't think any of us source any fruit at all from anywhere. And this whole Merlot thing, I made a bit of Merlot up in Napa Valley, And it was fine. I wouldn't say the fruit that I was working with particularly would knock my socks off, but it was fine. It was pretty standard. And seeing how this has evolved over the past 6 or 7 years is kind of makes that whole sideways thing more personal than anything else. Because like we're making awesome Merlot, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts around that. So it's sad that a single statement in a Hollywood movie would have such an effect. But Matt's also correct, and there are quite a bit of mediocre Merlots out there, and I'm just happy to be able to work with some great fruit here in Happy Canyon.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's move on to the Grimm's Cab. We'll get into some cab here for the next few wines. Ernst, do you want to explain what you guys are up to with cab up there, and what we can expect in this bottle here? And maybe I'll run the flyover while you're talking. How about that? We'll do
how about that? So you don't see our faces. So 2017 first vintage year at Grimm's Bluff, and there's obviously a stylistic approach, and trying to make wine in a leaner style. So I'll go back a few years. 2014 I made wine from a few different vineyards. I also from Starlane here in the area, and I remember Jeff Newton and Ben going, "Oh, you're gonna make this really green wine from this stuff. You can't pick it now. It's too early. The wine's gonna be green." And the wine turned out not to be green, and then what that showed me was that we have more than 300 days of sunshine here in Santa Barbara County. Like you would have to pick really early to get herbaceousness here in Santa Barbara, and it just showed me like we were able to make these classically styled wines that have tannin and is not just about power and impact, but also about structure and elegance. So I obviously have a style that we go for here, and it's leaner. This was a blend of 5 different blocks from the property, a combination of trellis fruit and head trained California clones, which obviously came from France back in the day, French clones, and also some Argentinian clones. All separate, all fermented separate in 1.5 ton bins, pumped over. We typically halfway through try and do like what they call the Aussie pump over. We pull out all the juice and really aerate it, splash it into a different tank, and then bring it back to soften the tannins. It's been to me it's about the learning curve and to learn from each vintage. This wine we was aged for 16, 17 months, 50% new French oak, all tight grain. We use a combination of barrels that we like, and we're going for that classic style. Something that's got structure and tannin and ageability. I don't know if you guys any thoughts.
And how many crabs do you guys?
We do a bottling of just the trellis stuff. We do a bottling of just the head train, the combination, which is the estate. And then this last year, we're starting to play around with 100% new oak bottlings on a smaller scale. So it's we've got this blank canvas, and the idea is to search out and learn and have fun, obviously, and make wines that capture this site.
That's great. And do you find a big difference between this site and working with Star Lane at all? I mean, as far as from your experience, or anything you particularly unique?
You know, I think the uniqueness of Happy Canyon is the fact that there's more rocky, more gravelly soils, like you mentioned, the serpentine, which is actually slightly toxic to the vines, but it controls at a certain ratio. It controls the vigor, and so we're able to, in Happy Canyon, grow cab that's not struggling, but they're not growing vigorous. So what you end up is you're ending up with fruit that has more intensity, more density, compared to Happy Canyon, compared to your different sites. The way we make our wines, if you're picking to end with a certain potential alcohol, and to make a wine that's microbially stable, to where we do as little as possible in the winery, the difference between Star Lane and Groves Bluff is a very big, because there's not a lot of manipulation. It's all site. It all comes down to different aspects, different soils. The soils here, even though this is a 300 yards above the riverbed, it is actually old riverbed from 1,000 years ago, and it's the idea is to capture this site.
Great. Well, it's fun to watch that project develop, and just have another name from Happy Canyon to be able to try different wines and different styles of wines from. It's always nice to have a lot of variety, and I think you guys are doing a good job of that. So
yeah, and to Rick and I, it's fun to see the evolution. Like this 17, when we bottled this wine, it was tight. A lot of tannin. But I kept telling Rick, like, okay, we need to think about, don't think about how this wine tastes right now when we're putting it in the bottle. Let's think about when we're going to sell it, and let's see this evolution. And it's fun and eye-opening and educational to see how every 6 months you go back to the same bottle, and how those tannins have resolved, and how they're changing, and how even now with us pouring this wine from when we opened it to right now, how things have changed. And to me, that's what winemaking is all about: this evolution of the vineyard, of the wine, and our own education.
Right. Great. Well, we've made the Frenchman wait patiently this whole time. So, hey, Simon, how you doing, man?
I'm great, thank you.
You ready to tell us a little bit about Crown Point and these two wines we're trying with you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Crown Point, at Crown Point we make two wines. One called the Estate Selection, which is Cabernet dominant, but as all 5 Bordeaux varietals, and the Cabernet Sauvignon, where we want to showcase the varietal at a much higher percentage. So that's it in a nutshell. You will probably notice that the Estate Selection has a silkier component to it, very, very round type of tannin, and the Cabernet is a little bit more driven towards what the personality of the varietal has to offer, of course. One thing that amazes me about Happy Canyon in general, from my own perspective and what I'm witnessing at Crown Point, is I think a very unique terroir, extremely interesting for Bordeaux varietals, in the sense that we have cooler nights than Napa, and we may have less heat waves than Napa. So as a result, you have wines, as you can see, that are usually a little lower in tannins than their Napa counterparts, a little bit more user friendly, and as Ernst was saying, they have a tannin evolution that is fairly quick and for the better. And that's I think because the terroir here provide us that. I think extremely high quality of tannins and tannins that are in balance with the wine, not over what the wine can handle or above that. And especially if you think about Napa Mountains or Atlas Peak and whatnot, Howe Mountain, you have, I think, wines here in Happy Canyon that show, I think, very interesting personality and great stuff. And that's all terroir driven. So even if there's only 5 or 6 of us, I think in the room today, I think it's a very interesting terroir for California in the landscape of Cabernet, of course, and Bordeaux varietals in general.
And tell us about your background too, where you're from originally and how you got to making wine in California.
Yeah, it's pretty chaotic, but I'm from originally Northern Rhone in France and spent quite a bit of time in Italy. And after a few years in Italy, I thought it'd be weird for a French guy to just have Italian experience. So I went back to Bordeaux and studied there, got my master's, and worked at Domaine de Chevalier, Chateau Pichon-Longueville mainly. And I asked a young stud at the time, what should I do next? His name was Michel Roland, and he pointed me towards California. Like, you're gonna love it. They'll give you a car and a computer there. You're gonna have a good time. So I came to work in Napa in 2010 for the first time, spent some time with Harlan Estate Group for a few years, joined Maryvale Vineyards after that, and I heard good things about what was going on in Happy Canyon at Crown Point, and I was really curious and interested, and I came. I tried the wines. It's a very interesting site, like I mentioned before, and what's exciting, I think we all share this, all of us, we kind of all have a similar background. We all came here from a different place. We all trying to learn about this area and what we can do with it. And there's a pioneer feel, I think, in the area that is very interesting. We're all learning about what is the best material, what's the best way to farm the grapes we have. What is the best way to make those wines? I think you've heard a lot today about how we do things differently, and I think that's a sign that we're all trying to learn about this place and how to make it great.
And how so Crown Point is owned by Roger Bauer, who you saw in one of those pictures riding the horse in the vineyard, and I can go show those slides again. But he took over the vineyard. It had been planted as something called Cimarron. But how old do the vines go back? What are some of the older vines on the property?
Some of the older vines, I think the old plantings are around 2002. I am about to put the last nail in the coffin on those old blocks because they were not, I think they were planted with, different goal in mind. I'm not sure I agree with the rootstock that's there, and I think those old blocks will need a replant for sure. But yeah, so most of the plantings for us are early 2013 or early 2012 when Roger came on board and started to replant the vineyard. When he first bought the property, there was only a few acres planted, and they were planted to Rhones or not necessarily Cabernet. So we slowly replanted, and we're replanting some more as we go. I think we've got a good understanding of what's the best rootstock to use for us in the area, and what clones we like. We have about 15 different clones of Cabernet here. They're all really good for different reasons. It's really fun to work with such a wide array of of clones because you can witness the different personality. The vineyard side to me is quite mind-blowing because at first when Roger came, they told him that the hillside could not be planted. It was too steep and too rocky. And in some parts of the vineyards, we have about 30% rocks into the soil. It's pretty much a rock pile. And Roger doesn't take no for an answer. And apparently he has money to burn. So he said, no, you know what? We'll plant it. If it doesn't work, at least we've tried. And now these are some of the best blocks we have. I would describe our soils as, of course, very rocky, but we have two different types, I think, of terroir on property. We've got one that is a hillside, very steep, and southeast exposure, and that make wines that are very, very powerful, high in phenolics, high in tannins, very kind of dense and concentrated. And then we've got the soils around the winery that have a little less rock, but that look a little bit more like to what you will find around Touquelon, west side of Oakville. So we've got the east side of Oakville and the west side, I feel, in two parts of a vineyard. Yeah, like you see that long kind of stretch there, it is the hillside, and it's slopes close to 30% in some places. And then around the winery, so towards the right side of the picture, you've got soils that are a little bit more loamy, a little bit more user-friendly. What amazed me by coming here is how easy those wines are to make. You know, as a winemaker, when you find, I think, grapes that naturally make good wines, great wines, it means that you have a really good sites under your feet, a really good, really interesting grapes. So the grapes, I think, in our area, and when you try all those wines, you could see it for yourself, make phenomenal wines, and I think it's quite easy to make wine from here. So that answers most of the questions we have to deal with.
And what's in this estate selection? What is the blend there?
So the blend is 73 Cab, 16 Malbec, and 11% Merlot. Like Brad and Tyler have said, Merlot is quite elegant, I think, in Happy Canyon. It's a good. It makes some very interesting wines. Quite frankly, we've seen some interesting Sauvignon Blanc as well. And Cab Franc. Quite frankly, all those varietals grow phenomenal in Happy Canyon. If you ask me which one is my favorite, it's probably Cab, and that's why there's such a large part of Cabernet to the blend. But each varietal, Malbec too, are quite impressive. I think that they produce to what the best of the varietal has to offer.
And then this was your 2020 was your first vintage there from start to finish, right? You came in 2019 and kind of finished the vintage, and this was your first real year from start to finish, right?
Interesting year 2020, as you may have heard, but I think that everybody can chime in on that. Is that the wines in 2020 are just phenomenal. We were lucky to have such a good vintage year. It's been so spoiled up north with the smoke. I'm thinking we're going to be one of the only wine region to make Cabernet this year on the West Coast, and it's going to be really high quality. So that's at least there's something good about 2020. And one big thing that I'm not sure we've really talked about is how close we are to the ocean. We are about 10 miles, 11 miles away from the ocean, and that big, of course, mass of cold air acts as a buffer against heat waves. So that plays a big part into the personality of the wines. It tends to limit the amount of heat that we're getting compared to other places, and that makes us one of the most coastal Cabernet vineyard in the West, and I think that's quite fun to think about.
Yeah. So, Stacy had a question. I mean, you were talking some comparisons between this and Napa, but how would you compare the wines coming out of Happy Canyon to Bordeaux, which you know quite well?
Oh man, I got so many fights with the French over the last few years and months. I would not even compare them. I think it's two different expressions of Cabernet. It's not even the same score played by two different artists. It's a completely different animal. I think the way I vision wines is that our frame is often much bigger. I think we've got much higher phenolics, so a bigger frame is just naturally a bigger wine. You know, our climate is different. It's much drier. We've got much more sunlight, much more UV than they do in Bordeaux. Bordeaux can get pretty hot, as you know, so you can get some cooked flavors in Bordeaux, but I think they're on a different level. We've got much more fruit and I think dark kind of tones into the wines versus Bordeaux tends to be a little more savory in general. I think they're two different animals as far as I'm concerned.
Dave is wondering, these wines are pretty extracted and higher alcohol. Is that something you're going to want to keep exploring, or are you going to dial it back a bit? What's your take there?
The question of extraction is oftentimes a really interesting one. As far as I'm concerned, extraction is mostly passive. Extraction does not depend on me, or very less, very not as much as one would think. Mother Nature, I think, dictates most of the extraction, and it's not necessarily a physical process. I think, are the wines extracted? I don't know. I think there's quite an interesting balance and concentration to the estate selection that we're trying here. By being a different person, I think the style will change per se, because it's just our understanding, just like a composer. You're dealing with the fruit, you're dealing with the score. The way you play it is up to you, up to your sensitivity, whether you're conscious of it or not. Just the daily decisions that you're making are just being impacted by your experience and your sensitivity. So as much as I would not like to change the wines, because I think they're quite brilliant, they will happen to be different for sure.
Right. And I think when some of our conversations, when you got here, I mean, you realize you can be capturing a lot of the freshness that kind of comes from this area inherently. And that sounds like something you're maybe going to target as well.
Yeah, it happens. It already happens. Yeah. I'm really in love with those 2020 wines, because they actually have that. I think naturally the wines, as you've tasted before, from the Cab Franc to the Merlot, they have a natural richness to them, and that's just the way things are here. It's a cool climate. It's really cool, cooler than what you would think coming from up north. And I have to change everybody's paradigm on this. When you're coming to Santa Barbara, it's a mild weather. It's not hot. It's not cold per se. I mean, in Happy Canyon, right? It's a mild weather, really, and I think that makes the wines very interesting for sure. Now regarding alcohol, I'm not necessarily a fan of alcohol, and I think more is not necessarily better. So this is changing already as I looked at my list of analysis from 2020.
Great. Well, thank you, Simone. Let's finish our tasting here with Tyler's 2013 Astral Cab from Starlane Vineyard. This was Tyler's first vintage, so we can see how he did. How do you think he did, Tyler?
Well, I think the vineyard did pretty well, like Simone's saying. What did I do? I don't know. I just got the alcohol present. I fermented the sugar. Honestly, it has a a richness that reminds me of that vintage a lot, both in the characters of the vintage. But I had arrived in July, and there was definitely a little bit of a foot on the boat, foot on the dock approach to how to make the wines. I really enjoy like it doesn't taste like it's aged much, which is, I think, a good sign for its future potential to age. It has a richness that I think subsequent vintages of this wine, with the exception of 17, are a little more tense. But no, I'm sipping it. I'm not spitting. I don't have a spit tune here. I'm pretty happy with it. You know, in that vintage, there were a lot of things I did right away, and I would love to pick Simone's brain a little more privately about his journey down here and how what he did right away. You know, like, for example, this wine used to be 100%, if not more, new oak, and this is like 60. You know, just dial the oak back right away. I don't believe in adding sweetness to sweetness. You know, picking much earlier than they used to pick, even though this still is a generous wine. But one of the keys to this wine, again, speaks to Happy Canyon, is it's almost all own-rooted Cabernet. These are not grafted vines. Jim Dearberg took the risk to plant own-rooted cab. I think it's probably still true that we have the highest concentration of own-rooted cab in the state of California, which is only like 15 acres. But we've added more since then. And so what does that do to the vines or to the wine? Well, Vitis vinifera is pretty drought tolerant, and on its own roots, it's actually more vigorous, which could sometimes be considered a negative. But because it is so dry here, and our soils, at least where these vines are planted, are fairly free draining, by having a more vigorous rootstock in a low vigor site, you're actually able to farm with a lot less inputs. And so these vines do not get out of control. You know, I think it was Ernst was saying, just in general, the low vigor we get in this area, you know, these are not like immaculate, perfect curtain canopies like you see sometimes in the North Coast, where they have 40, 50 inches of rain in the winter. You know, our average is about 15. But at the same time, through 2 heat waves this year, the vines that made this wine, we did not irrigate. And, you know, they survived just fine. And I think it's a testament to, one, the age. I mean, they are older vines, deeper roots. But I think there's something to these own-rooted vines that tends to give us, they tend to hold more herbal qualities into riper, richer textures, which I think is just a cool paradox. And so that's what drives this wine. Maybe 85, 90% of the cab in here is own-rooted, and then I don't remember what the rest of the blend is. And just to tease everybody with my approach, you know, Simone was mentioning how young their vines are. I think that's a great thing for them because they're healthy. When I was apparently bashing old vines, I didn't mean to be bashing old vines, except to say that I think the question is a little silly when we ask, you know, do old vines make better wine? Because old vines are a pre-selected population. And as an estate producer, you know, you experience that firsthand, where if you had a vineyard for 30 years and it made average wine for 30 years, and it was no longer economical to farm, or never was, and it just didn't meet your state, you're not going to wait 10 more years and go, oh, but when it gets to 40, it'll get there. You know, that there's a benefit to what you've learned in the first 30 years to then make a change that can actually improve your quality. And like Simone was saying, you know, he's about done already with these vines from 2002. That could be a good thing. That could advance, you know, the quality on their vineyard and quality in Happy Canyon. Right. But these own-rooted vines have taught us a lot, and I think we're better suited for our sustainable future, certified sustainable winery. You know, if we use less water, we're pumping less water out of the ground, which means burning less fuel. So yeah.
If I may jump on the old vine, I think in the early 2000s, it's really the beginning of the appellation, I think, in general. So, and it's also really dark years for nurseries. So a lot of that material that was planted, I think, from 98 to 2002, whether you're in Napa or here, is sometimes not too good. And one thing that's super interesting in California, because of the drought, by when I mean drought, I mean it doesn't rain in the summer, you know, that's rare in the wine world. It definitely has an impact on the way that the plants are growing. And we noticed, I was chatting one day with Philippe Malka, and coming from Europe, in Bordeaux especially, you don't see young vines to be very interesting before 10 years old. Very interesting. I mean, you cannot compare them with old vines that are 50 years old, or you don't compare your young blocks with your best blocks on property usually. But in California, you totally can. After 5 years, I think you have a really good understanding of the quality potential that a block will produce. And I think after 7 years, you're already at peak. In most of the places I've witnessed, you're already almost at peak quality production after 7 years. So, you know, it seems that old vines do not necessarily matter as much in this part of the world that they do in places where maybe it rains a lot, and having very young roots is not a good thing. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it comes partly down to vigor. You know, older vines in Europe with rain throughout the year are going to be lower vigor. And lower vigor usually promotes more concentration and depth in the wine.
Right. Well, I don't want to keep anyone much longer than they need to be here. So thank you all for sharing these delicious wines. And I hope we learned something about Happy Canyon, about these producers. Dave did have... oh yeah, Dave's saying those old wine zins can be fantastic, which is true.
Of course they can. They're not. It's just, of course they are. If they're not fantastic, they would have been ripped out.
So I've always liked that argument, that the reason the old vines are good is because they were always good to begin with. That's why you didn't rip them out.
If they weren't good or not productive enough, they would have been ripped out. No one's dumb enough to throw their money away for 60 years.
You can't really compare also some varietals between them. You know, when it's about Cabernet, I think Cabernet wines have a personality that's very different from Zin. I think you expect from Zin not necessarily power. You expect more seduction, and if a Cabernet doesn't have, I think, at least some kind of mouthfeel and tension, then it's a Pinot, right?
Great. Well, if no one has any more burning questions, we can wrap this up. And thank you all for joining us. Went a little longer than we'd anticipated, but it seemed like everyone was learning something, so that's always good. And then stay tuned to Lacey's emails, and we might do another one of these sometime soon as well from a different region. So they've been fun, and I'm learning things too, which is always great, and getting lots of good wines to try. So bonuses all around.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I want to thank everybody. Thank the producers and Lacey and Matt for putting this whole thing together. This is awesome.
Same here. Yeah, thank you all. It's enjoyable. We should do it more often.
It's very eye-opening, so thank you guys.
Well, thank you for sharing your
thank
wine.
you. Yes, thank you.
Thanks everyone
All right.
for joining.
Bye, everyone.